What's the most screwed up thing your employer has done? One spring morning, my city was hit with a freak snowstorm right before morning rush hour. Several inches of wet snow fell quickly and snarled traffic all over town. At the major insurance company I worked for at the time, about one-third of the staff said screw it and just stayed home. The rest of us all arrived for work anywhere from 1 to 3 hours late. In the days following the storm, all the people who stayed home were stressed about how the company would deal with the unexcused absences. They were all hoping they would catch a break and be allowed to use a vacation day instead of being docked a day's pay and getting dinged on their next performance review. When the next payday came around, we got a memo with our stubs explaining that all the employees who stayed home would be given an excused absence and paid in full, while the rest of us were docked for the time we were late for work. This happened 30 years ago, and I still can't talk about it without sputtering. This really happened. I only remember that it was spring 1987, and my half-assed search of historical weather data shows it was probably to clarify, the employees who stayed home didn't even have to burn a vacation or sick day. They were given a bonus paid day off. The company was Blue Cross/Blue Shield of Kentucky, now known as Anthem. Sorry to all the others who had similar stories to share. I feel your pain. Story 2. Worked delivering pizzas for a local Italian restaurant. One evening I showed up for work and the place was suddenly a Chinese food restaurant, fully staffed and open. Happened overnight, never got a phone call. This was in a smallish Texas town. I never made any attempt to contact the Russian. I'm fine with this. Story 3. 2 stories from the same employer. First, I'm colorblind. My boss assigned me a work task once that was color-coded in a way that I couldn't see. When I brought up my vision issues, not refusing to do the work but asking for accommodation, I was written up for what they perceived as insubordination. When I filed a complaint with HR asking for the write-up to be removed, the HR rep graciously gave me what she perceived as a solution, that I should go use the company's tuition reimbursement program to go take a remedial art class at my local community college, so that you can finally learn your colors, she said. Second, same employer. I was working second shift hours, 4 to midnight, in our network control center. At one point during the holiday season, I was working the last part of my shift alone. Nobody else in the building except the security guard, who was out of my line of sight. At midnight, when my shift ended, my coworker came in to start working the overnight shift alone. This coworker is seriously diabetic, of the type who wears an insulin pump to regulate her system. Literally, the moment she walked in the door, her pump started beeping that she was out of insulin. To avoid going into a diabetic shock at a time when she had nobody else around to help save her, she had to drive home quickly, pick up an insulin refill, and then come back to work. That required me to stay overtime by about 45 minutes to keep the place staffed. When I showed up at 4 the next afternoon for my next shift, I discovered I had been written up for the unauthorized overtime. I left the company within a few weeks after incident. Story 4. Working at Wendy's. Fire dep came by and said our fryer was a fire hazard because of the extremely frayed cords. Got large grip tool and pulled the plug while wearing thick-ass rubber gloves. Gave the paper to me, shift lead and highest ranking, that basically said it was fire hazard and it needed to be repaired or replaced. Put an orange sticker over the plug and basically made it very obvious. Unfortunately, we only had 2 fries, and the other was used for chicken only, and we weren't allowed to fry fries in this one. So the guy leaves and I get to work and hang signs saying blah blah blah, no fries today, sorry. About 3 hours later at night, manager comes in and flips, says that I needed to plug the flyer in ASAP. Told me to rip the orange security tape off, grab the frayed plug, and ignore the safety depth and just plug it back in. I told her no, that I wouldn't do it. My name was on the sheet signing. It was my ass if they came back and saw that we didn't get it fixed. Not only that, but it was a fire hazard. And this Karen wanted me to barehand it when the other guy used a special tool and rubber gloves for it. I told her no. She sent me home and tried to bully others into plugging it in. I told them not to and that it was dangerous and breaking a law by doing it. I tried to explain that by doing it, they could face lawsuits and whatnot, because cameras and I sure as hell wasn't taking the fall for that. Big fight with the manager, and finally she just grabs it and plugs it in. She tells me not to bother coming back since I was starting a fight and riling people up. I go outside and call the fire dep and get in touch with the marshal and tell him everything. Watch them pull up before I left. I mean, I guess I got her back, but I still lost my job. Story 5. Last week my boss gave me a difficult task with an impossible time frame. When the time was up and I said I needed another day to finish, he got all cocky and went, I know, I don't need it until tomorrow. But I told you I needed it today because if I told you I needed it tomorrow, you'd say you couldn't get it done until Monday. And when I told him that's not true, he pointed to the fact that I was unable to do the task in his just recently admitted impossible time frame as evidence that I wouldn't have finished it on time if he'd told me when he actually needed it. So, setting me up for failure and then using the fact that I failed as evidence to say I'm a crafty employee. Ain't management grand? Story 6. A manager at work. Now, I always try to be helpful. I do my work and try to contribute to make other people's days easier. I arrive to work after school and I'm just about to get changed. A manager comes in and says, "Hey, PM me, you smiling. Would you be able to bring something from the freezer to the front?" I figured, sure, it must be busy. It doesn't hurt me. I don't clock in, just quickly nip to get it. I arrive on the front, the store is completely quiet, and the manager is bragging to another manager about how convincing she can be, getting me to work for free. It doesn't seem like much now I've typed it, but by God, my blood boiled, and she's the only person I resent. Multiple instances of her being manipulative, but this was the most innocent it seemed, and I thought I was genuinely helping. Working off the clock was my choice. Fault, it's illegal. To save time. However sassy it would have been to return the item to the fridge, it would be an item I needed when I did clock in, so wouldn't have been worth the cool points. Story 7. I got another job offer for a position that paid about 50% more than what I was currently making. My supervisor made a counteroffer that more than matched it. I just had to jump through some paperwork formality. That paperwork gets dragged out for about 2 months, when I'm told that the supervisor didn't have the authority to make that kind of counteroffer. Instead, I was told 10%, take it or leave it. I had the offer in writing, but it wasn't an official document. Fighting it would have been a long uphill battle. I took the 10%, found another job, and left without helping train a replacement with no ducks given. New job was even higher than the original offer, so it all worked out. Story 8. I work at Sears as a backroom associate. The PMT, preventative maintenance technician, position opened up. The day the old PMT worker put his 2-week notice in, my boss approached me asking if I would like the job. Knowing that the pay was better than my current positions, I was excited and instantly told him yes. The following day, they started training me for the position. This went on for about a week or so. They announced that there would be a meeting at the end of the month. Well, I attended the meeting only to be introduced to the new PMT worker. I couldn't believe it. They gave me the job and then took it away just like that. Ever since then, there has been no mention of the incident. They handled the entire situation in such a horrible manner. I guess that's why Sears is one of the top 10 worst places to work at. Damn Sears. Story 9. Day 1. I am contracted to edit a screenplay for an up-and-coming feature film production. Day 2. I receive the first draft of the aforementioned screenplay. Half of my payment is provided to me. Day 3. I return the edited screenplay to the person who hired me. Day 5. Having heard nothing back from my employer, I follow up with a question about next steps. Day 7. The silence continues, and I start to get worried about the second half of my payment. Day 8. I finally receive a response. In it, I'm told that I was budgeted for a minimum number of hours, which I had yet to meet as a result of editing the screenplay so quickly. I'm asked to fill out the remaining time by doing a scene breakdown and a cost analysis of every prop that will appear in the movie. Despite initially wanting to protest, I look at the turn of events as an opportunity. Day 10. The requested documents are sent to my employer. Day 11. Oh, look, the silence is back. Day 13. Neither my emails nor my telephone call are answered. Day 15. I get in touch with another member of the production team and discover that nobody has any idea who I am. It comes to light that the person who'd hired me had subcontracted what was supposed to be their work and had taken the credit for everything that I'd done. This person was subsequently fired from the project after being paid several times more than what I had been promised. I asked to take their place, but am told that the work is already done. Day 200-ish, my name does not appear in the credits. Story 10. I'm currently supervising anywhere from 7 to 22 guys at work, depending on the season. I don't get paid extra to do this. I just do it because it needed doing, and have been doing quite well at it for the past 14 months. Recently, we had quite a few supervisor positions open up. I put in and was interviewed for one of them. My boss called me into his office and informed me that he and the warehouse director felt I was too introverted to be a supervisor. He suggested I start working on coming out of my shell, so if another position opens up, I can try again. I'll work on coming out of my shell, all right. Going to get a lot practice interviewing for other jobs elsewhere. Story 11. I had a job a couple years ago that hired me to do Job A. Job A involves being on call to drive upwards of 10 hours to sites across 2 states where the company gets fined if work isn't completed within 24 hours. Right after starting, I get handed Job B to do when not doing Job A. Job B involves repairing equipment necessary for other people doing Job C. It's okay doing Job A and Job B, as I can usually get far enough ahead in Job B to not have issues, but times do happen where Job A and Job B are both idle. So I get given Job C too. Job C involves performing regular maintenance and the occasional on-call job where the company gets fined if work doesn't get done within 72 hours. It did not take long for me to figure out that Under some circumstances, I'd be forced to either get the company fined for failing at job A or job C while also failing at job B. I raise concerns and get told, that will never happen, don't worry about it. Within a month, it almost happened, but get talked down to and told to do my jobs, cue me quitting before I get blamed for getting the company fined. Story 12. It's a two-parter. Part 1, hires me for full-time permanent position first week of August, then announces on the second week of August that the office will be closing at the end of the year. Part 2, promises excellent severance package for those who stay on till the end of the year. I do so, and in the last week, the office is open. They then try to take it away from me, telling me I didn't work there long enough to qualify for it. My supervisor was quite pissed at this, so she called corporate HR and arranged it so I got the full package and an apology from the gitbag who tried to shaft me. Story 13. Years ago, I was working for a small retail company. We had a truck come in that we needed to unload. It was a 600-plus box truck that we had to unload by hand. This particular day was incredibly hot. By around 8 a.m., it was already 85 degrees. My boss stuck my happy ass in the truck by myself to unload it. When I asked for water, she said no and that I needed to finish unloading the truck before I was allowed to take a break. I just looked at her and said, why, yes, massa. Then got written up. Hooray! Story 14. I had a boss who constantly told me how stupid and useless I was, which was annoying, but I tolerated it because I needed the job. But then he started making comments about how hot my mom was, and eventually tried to move me around the office when I was in his way by grabbing my hips and pushing me, so I walked out. Another boss around this time spilled coffee beans on the floor, asked me to clean it up, then walked around behind me to watch and said, now there's a sight I like. That one I didn't walk out of, but it ended even worse because through some shady tax crap he was doing, we all ended up paying tons of money come tax season, even though he'd evidently been taking taxes out of our paychecks all year, while he ran away to Canada. Story 15. This will require a little bit of backstory. For the past several years, I've been working my way up in an incredibly competitive industry. I started in the lowest possible position for which a person could apply, poured myself into every project, and eventually wound up in a leadership role. Better still, I came by every promotion honestly, never so much as considering the shady political maneuvers that could have facilitated my ascent. It wasn't the easiest of paths to take, but by the time that I was offered a spot as a manager, I developed a reputation for being a friendly, positive, and proactive asset to any team. Accepting the job took me across the country, but I knew that if I worked hard and stayed away from any office politics, I'd be able to find success. Unfortunately, there are people in the world who don't appreciate that kind of attitude. The first endeavor, for which I was personally responsible, required that I work with a senior member of another department. I'd been involved in similar collaborations before, of course, but never with an individual quite like this fellow. He was histrionic to an extreme and prone to exaggerating any flicker of negativity that he could find. For instance, he would frequently send me an email, wait 5 minutes, during which I'd be typing up a detailed response, and then blast our entire distribution list with complaints about how he had been waiting for hours without receiving an answer. On those rare occasions when I had managed to reply before his inevitable outburst, the guy would find something about which to complain, and it ultimately created an atmosphere of perpetual tension between us. Since it was clear that my usual practices weren't being appreciated, I set up a meeting to explore alternatives. It was then that I discovered a previously hidden detail. The folks immediately above my aggressor had apparently been offered a work of fiction, in which the man had not only taken credit for every one of my triumphs, but had also blamed me for each of his own mistakes. Every late email came at a time when someone was breathing down his neck, and according to him, I was nothing more than a lazy, unproductive, and even hostile coworker, more intent on making him look bad than I was on doing my job. When I called attention to the timestamps on these emails, the guy's response was that he had first requested information in person, and that I had ignored him. The solution I proposed, and which was added as a standard to the intra-office communication plan, was that every interaction would receive an email follow-up in order to be official. He also presented an exchange we'd previously had, wherein he'd made a demand of my team, and I had summarily refused to meet it. The fact that I'd explained how it was physically impossible to do things his way, while using concrete data and offering a half-dozen alternatives, all of which he'd rejected, had been mysteriously omitted from the transcript. Fortunately, I'd made sure to document everything and to offer my own reports about what had happened. But even so, circumstances finally came to a head when the fellow issued an ultimatum to my superior. If I wasn't fired at the start of the next quarter, the project and its budget would be given to another team. Everyone in my department knew that I wasn't to blame for the disagreement, so the only immediate fallout was my transfer to another focus. I resolved to keep my head down, work even harder, and contribute however I could, thinking as I did that the storm would eventually subside. Instead of blowing over, though, things well and truly blew up. With nothing more pressing on my plate, I set myself to the task of optimizing a number of corporate processes. It was only supposed to be a research project, but I soon discovered that a decent third of the work we were doing was completely unnecessary. I wrote up a report on the superfluous activities, outlined the expected savings, and sent it off to my superior, who disseminated the details through the company. By an odd coincidence, and I swear it was a coincidence, it turned out that the man with whom I'd butted heads had recently compiled a description of his own responsibilities, and our two lists were nearly identical. Needless to say, the fellow was furious. He renewed his crusade against me, sending a long and largely fabricated account of my alleged failings and self-serving machinations to everyone who would read it. He even called out the fact that I'd rebutted his accusations with evidence, claiming that I'd cherry-picked situations that made me look good, while avoiding all of the times that I'd allegedly been combative or unresponsive. He did not have any evidence of his own, but apparently his seniority made him more believable. This was not a small company, but as with any group of humans, people were drawn to the drama like flies to a septic tank. My superiors started receiving pressure from executives to fire me, and my once stellar reputation was almost entirely obliterated. Various options were discussed, but in the end, I was left with little choice but to resign from the company. That was 2 months ago. I'm still looking for a new job. Story 16. I got pregnant while working for a small subcontracting company. I told my boss I was assistant to VP and let them know I'd need to take a few weeks off after I gave birth. So the VP hired an assistant to cover my duties while I was gone. I gave birth and took the week off, and then an additional week with the baby for a total of 2 weeks of leave. I returned to work for a bit until my newborn son got sick. Very, very sick. He was hospitalized for almost a week. I missed 3 days of work because of this, and the day I returned, I was fired. And guess who replaced me? The person who I basically trained to do my job, my assistant. Taught me a life lesson there. Never train someone to do your job. Bonus. The company was running out of money and fired others as well without warnings, cause, etc. I filed for unemployment, along with others, and was subsequently denied. The VP and managers submitted forged timesheets, our signatures on the cards, and said the employees who were fired were termed due to being late 3 or more days in a row, and were warned. Story 17. Worked at McDonald's for my first job. After working there for about 6 months, I think, my manager offered me a shift supervisor promotion, which came with a pay raise. I'm fine with the additional responsibility, and more pay is always nice, so I accept. My manager goes into the back and comes back with a blue workbook-looking thing and tells me to fill it out outside of work and bring it back to her so she can process the promotion or something. I figure, sure, why not? I can spend a couple hours at home filling this thing out. Looking back now, I should have contested the fact that she wanted me to fill it out on my own time, but whatever, it was my first job. So I fill out the packet and bring it into work the next day during my shift. Weeks pass. No word from my manager about the promotion. So I bring it up and ask when I should be expecting to hear something, to which she replies, "You need to fill out the workbook first." I raise an eyebrow and tell her I have. And in fact, she was the one who got me the book and the one who I had handed it into. She denies both of those things and hands me a blank workbook and tells me if I want the promotion, I need to fill that out first. I reluctantly agree and spent about 15 minutes that evening at home filling out the workbook again. Since I had already gone through all of the material, it was much faster. On my next shift, I handed in again to a different manager since the original manager wasn't on shift that day. A month and some change passes. During this time, 2 other employees have been promoted to shift supervisors. I'm on shift with original manager again, and I bring up the promotion once again, to which she replies, "You never turned in the workbook I gave you." I tell her I gave it to the other manager. She said she never got it, and it's not in the file, so I must be lying. She once again produces a workbook and tells me to fill it out if I want the promotion. You'd think by this point I would have learned, but 16-year-old me wasn't really experienced with this kind of thing, so I guess I thought it was standard corporate shenanigans or something? I don't know. Anyway, I fill out the packet again and hold on to it until I'm on shift with original manager again, and sort of make a point of turning it in like, "Okay, here's the workbook. I'm handing it to you directly this time, so there's no chance you'll think I didn't turn it in this time, right?" She sort of laughs and says something along the lines of, "Haha, I got it. Don't worry." A month passes. Another person, a friend of mine from school, gets promoted to shift supervisor. While we're hanging out, I'm complaining about having to fill out the workbook 3 times and still not getting the promotion. To which my friend replies, "What workbook? They just told me I was a shift supervisor and I got the pay raise." What? During my next few shifts, I talk with the other 2 people who got promoted to shift supervisor, and neither of them had to fill out workbooks either. During my next shift with original manager on duty, and I go back to her office and again ask about the promotion, to which she predictably replies, "You haven't filled out a workbook." At this point, I had enough, and I asked to see the other workbooks that the other shift supervisors had filled out because none of them seemed to recall ever doing so. She says, "Fine, but you can't look inside because I don't want you cheating on the answers." She gets into the cabinet and pulls out 3 workbooks. the 3 workbooks that I had completed. The name field was on the front cover, and on all 3, my name was crossed out with the other employee's name, written below. On one of them, she didn't even try. There was literally a single line through my name, so it was still completely legible. I start arguing with her, saying that those are the workbooks that I had completed. You can see my name written there clearly in my handwriting, and she just keeps denying it, saying, "No, these are the other employees' workbooks. You need to complete your own if you want the promotion." So I put in my 2 weeks notice right there. The story has kind of a happy ending, as I found out that after an employee survey, that manager got fired about a year after I left, after she had worked at that McDonald's as a manager for 20 plus years. Story 18, last job. I now run my own business. I quit and gave my boss 30 days notice. I timed this politely on the beginning of our pay cycle. Because I'm nice, figured it was easier on everyone with the paperwork. He calls me up at 8 a.m. on the end of the first 2 weeks, payday. "I'm only paying you 50% for the last 2 weeks, even though I had an email confirmation of my expectation to work and be paid for 30 days. "Okay," I said. "I'll only work 50%. He was shocked when I only worked 4 hours a day for the next 2 weeks. Story 19. Not exactly my employer, but she was the supervisor directly over me. I was working control, which basically means I spend about 6 hours in a small room hitting buttons, watching cameras, and filling out paperwork. Nothing too bad, but you can't leave the room until you have someone come and relieve you. Around 4 hours in, I realized that I needed to piss. I called her and asked for someone to relieve me. She said she'd send our other coworker up when he got rounds done, and then she left. So no one could have relieved me, because you have to have someone on the floor at all times. I called her 3 more times, then every time she came back to our floor, but she kept blowing me off. I ended up pissing myself, coming down the stairs when she finally came to relieve me, after she'd spent the last 20 minutes standing in the doorway down the hall, shooting the crap with her higher-ups after she went for a bathroom break. I could duck and see her from my chair. Hell, I could see the bathroom from my chair, and she still let me piss myself. Joke's on her, though. I talked to my lieutenant. He moved me to work with people who actually knew what they were doing, and after 2 months, I finally got moved to days, which she'd been putting in for forever and not getting. Story 20. When I was 20, I was working at a gas station. My grandma became very, very ill, and we thought this was it. I was advised to head to the city 3 hours away ASAP to say goodbye. I was bawling and asked for a few days off. I got them. My grandma got well enough that we realized she would probably be okay. I was only gone 2 days, and I was going to work my days off to make them up. I walked into work, and my boss asked in a very snarky voice, "Did your grandma die?" I said no, and she said, "Oh, that's too bad," and walked away. I was shocked, horrified, crushed, and started crying again. She later told me to get over it, because it was just a joke. I quit less than a week later. Story 21. Moved my performance review not once, not twice, but 3 times. I would have worked there for base pay, less than my coworkers because they were hired later, for almost 2 years. I quit and now work at a good job with good pay and a boss that isn't an idiot. Story 22. Gave me less hours because the older women I worked with were upset that a young newbie was making more money than them. Needless to say, I left shortly after. Story 23. I was a team lead in one department when a manager job opened in another. I was 100% qualified for it. I had all the experience they wanted, and I'd worked with the director and other people on related projects that went really well. I interview, it goes perfectly, and the interviewers even tell me that was their best interview. I find out later only 3 people had applied, and I, by far, was the best person for it. About 3 weeks later, they announced Crap Brain McGee got the job. He seriously is about the worst employee ever. I damn near had a mental breakdown and wanted to burn the place to the ground. I ended up finding a better job with a different 4 months later, so it all worked out. I ran into one of the ladies that interviewed me later after I'd left the company. We talked for a few minutes, and she said she was disappointed to see me leave, but understood. I flat out told her if they would have made me the manager, I'd still be around, and I hoped Crap Brain ducked them over. She then went on to explain that they wanted me for the job, but my current boss told her that they didn't want me to leave because I do too much. So if they were to offer it and I accepted, she would drag out my transition as long as the company would allow. It took several years, but the karma train hit that dumb good and hard when I was able to advise my VP at the time to not hire her for a very good job because of what she'd done to me in the past. Story 24. Was incredibly dishonest about pay and job responsibilities. I got a job years ago, and my job title was essentially manager in training for a place that specialized in selling home refinancing. I was supposed to be fast-tracking my way into management, and I was told that I would never have to cold call anyone. Also, I was told it wasn't uncommon to earn like $50,000 to $70,000 per year. So yeah, young and dumb me thought that, hey, I have a degree, so working my way into a position that will probably pay about $50,000 per year shouldn't be that unrealistic. Here's what the job was actually like, not actually fast-tracking to management. Sure, I would get a promotion, but that only included a slightly higher base pay. I would have to get promoted again to actually become management, and that wasn't a quick process. Sure, 50 to 70,000 wasn't uncommon for the top people in management, so like a few people made that much, but everyone else made much, much less. While I was in training, my pay was capped at an hourly rate. I always realized that in sales, the top numbers weren't guaranteed, but I figured that even if I underperformed, I could still pull $40,000. Yeah, I cold called people. They claimed I technically wasn't cold calling since people click some button online for more information on refinancing, but come on. They weren't asking for our company to call them. It was cold calling. The job wasn't about helping people refinance their homes. It was about pressuring people to make a quick decision and buy our product, which some people I worked with speculated that it wasn't as good as other companies' products. Story 25, I got activated and sent to war. When I came home, my employer said I no longer had a job. I called the head of the Department of the Soldiers and Sailors Act and was informed that activated reservists get fired all the time and there is nothing they could do about it. The biggest offenders were the large contractors that build all of the military assets, jets, ships, rockets, etc. My employer was a small electronics company with a lot of government contracts. The colonel at the SSA asked me the name of my company that had fired me. I told the colonel. The response was, they have a lot of government contracts. I'll give the CEO a call and let them know that they have fired one of our reservists for answering the call, and we are going to review their government contracts. I was back to work the next day, and the human relations manager and my supervisor were in a lot of trouble. The CEO was pissed that those two knuckleheads had jeopardized the main source of income for the entire company over a mid-level employee. It was all a bluff, but fun to watch. I quit for a better job a year later. That company folded a few years later, not because of me, but because they kept too many knuckleheads on the payroll. Story 26. I got fired from Borders because the person covering for me when I was in vacation got fired. Didn't even find out from them. I found out because his girlfriend, who also worked there, texted me and told me I should call them. Story 27. This goes into revenge territory. Had a job where once a week the boss would bring us into his office and scream at us. Usually some minor issue, sometimes one caused by one of his deadbeat sons that also worked there. Finally, because one of the sons slacked off so much that it impacted business, he brings me in, tells me I've been wasting his time, and tells me that he's keeping my last paycheck. Before you all get up in arms that I should have called a lawyer, this guy was connected to all the local judges and officials. I waited a month, then made an anonymous call to the NDEP, basically a stricter NY state version of the EPA. I let them know about the dozens of barrels of used antifreeze buried in the swampy area behind my workplace. They were pleased, and I'm sure digging up that field cost more than the $400 they screwed me out of. Story 28. Let's see. Required furlough days? Nobody received a raise in 10 years. We were using computers more than a decade old and office furniture decades older than that. We received ever-increasing responsibilities and saw coworkers who had worked for the company for longer than I've been alive fired so they could hire a cheap college grad to replace them for half the price. Kids, don't get into the newspaper business. Story 29. My old boss refused to give us our pay stubs and insisted that we all use direct deposit. After leaving him, I got my stubs from the payroll company and did my taxes. I realized that at some point he changed my tax withholding so less taxes were deducted and gave me a pay cut without my knowledge, so that the weekly deposit was essentially the same. Ducking scumbag. Story 30. Grad school supervisor decided that my master's thesis project that had taken me 2 years to complete wasn't worth a full master's degree, even though it was just as long and work-intensive as those of my peers, and that I'd have to do this one other tiny project to tie it all up before he'd give me the go-ahead to defend and get my degree. That tiny extra project ended up being just as much work to complete as the first one. 4 years of my life for a 2-year master's degree. My scholarships ran out after 2 years and he stopped paying me a minimal stipend after 3, but I couldn't take on much other work or the whole thing just would have taken longer. $30,000 of debt from that experience when I went in fully funded. If anyone is considering a research-based grad program, please make sure your prospective supervisor isn't an exploitative git first. There's not much you can do about it once you're in it. Story 31. Put in a resume for a new job. IT director. Met with owner. We hit it off. Gave him my desired salary, $54,000. He didn't care for it. Left interview and went about my business. I wasn't in a hurry for a job. 4 months later, he calls me back and says he'd like to sit down with me again. He mentions that he can't meet my salary request, but we could work out other benefits in its place. I'm more than open to this idea. So we sit down and decide to knock off about $5,000 in salary in favor of the company paying for my cell phone and a better than standard vacation package. Now, this company has been around forever. but they never updated their vacation package. It is terrible for new employees. Basically, you have no vacation for your first year at all. Once your second year starts, you start accumulating days off. So basically, by the end of your second year, you now have 5 days off. If you were there for 10 years, you got a second week. So I said I wanted 2 weeks right out of the gate. He agreed, but asked me to be very quiet about this arrangement as it could potentially anger other employees. No, I didn't get it in writing. 6 months later, my wife and I have planned our very first out-of-country vacation. Beach, Cozumel, all-inclusive. A month before said vacation, I remind my boss, the owner, that I'll be taking some vacation time and that I'll need to use those vacation days we discussed when I got hired on. He had no recollection of such an agreement. We've always had the same vacation plan for every employee, so we wouldn't have given you special treatment, I argued with him. It didn't do much good. By the end of the conversation, he agreed to let me take 5 days of unpaid vacation and thus would dock my first post-vacation paycheck. I had resumes out by the end of the week. Thankfully, I'm skillful enough in my job set that finding another job of near equal value is pretty easy. Story 32, off the top of my head. I got mono right before my grad week, and I also was supposed to work a couple shifts before the week started because I had it booked off. I work at a grocery store, by the way. I felt so horrible I went to the doctor. He prescribed me antibiotics and gave me a note from my boss not to work. I decided to walk in myself to show him my condition and give him the note so he doesn't think I'm bullcrafting. I go up to his office to see him. When I saw him, I gave him the note. Could barely even speak because my throat was so swollen/in pain. Then he says, "Oh, for duck's sake." I was shocked. Then he says, "Oh, we really needed you. It's our big sale this weekend." And I was thinking, "Excuse me, Karen, I have mono." He keeps guilt tripping me. I tell him I'm sorry, and he just says, or yup. I genuinely felt terrible. Then he tells me that he's not letting me book off any more time until the end of the year. I'm gonna brag here and say that I'm a loyal employee, always cover shifts. One of the only people who does things that my coworkers are too ducking lazy to do. I take the initiative, I'm really good at doing the night shifts. Most people get help from me. And I literally train every ducking new person. Then my boss turns into a bitter duckhead when I get sick. I missed almost all grad events, parties, and such. The next week, due to my sickness, I also was in charge of making the graduation video at our prom banquet. And my vice principal made me work on it during class times. And as a result, my grades all dropped immensely. Easily one of the most non-productive weeks of my life. My boss has continued to do this to other people, and he has guilt-tripped me for not covering people's shifts. One time, he asked me to come in for an extra day when I had already made plans. I told him I honestly didn't want to, and he said, "Well, I honestly don't want to pay my employees." I was pretty angry with that comment. I responded saying, "Sorry for only coming in when I'm scheduled." He gave me a condescending laugh. I said goodbye and left. Story 33. At Sonic, and basically any place that pays you waiter's wage, is supposed to make up your tips if you don't make enough to make whatever the minimum wage is. So if you made $4 an hour and worked for 10 hours, you would be expected to make $37.50 to pull your hourly wage up to the minimum, say $7.75. My employer stiffed us instead. Story 34. Not me, but a friend a while ago worked for a company that had a mandatory meeting at a hotel on the other side of town. Everyone had to wrap up their work early and drive on over to the hotel. When they got there, a couple of the higher-ups were there, directing people either to conference room A or conference room B. As they're all waiting for this thing to start, he noticed that there were only like 10 people in his room. This is for a company that had 100+ employees. Eventually, a manager walks in and is all, "Thank you for coming today. If you're in this room, congratulations, you still have a job. Now, please return to work." One of the crappiest ways I've ever heard of for a mass layoff. People weren't even allowed back to the office to collect their things. Story 35. My last employer took the cake. They took every advantage they could possibly think during the Great Recession. After laying off 80% of the staff, they cut the rest of our pay by 20% and chanted, "Just be happy you even have a job," to any issue posed to them. No matter how crappy they treated you, that was the response. Over the next few years, they also took away insurance, PTO, holiday, etc. I could work 80 hours in a week, take off Friday, and get 4/5 pay. Worse was that they expected us to make up time we were being docked for. E.g., for one holiday, they tried getting people to come in the Sunday before to make up for the lost time, but then docked pay for the holiday still. They even once told me I needed to start working more when I was already doing 55 to 60 a week. They started hiring only contract labor so they wouldn't have to provide unemployment. To avoid getting in trouble, they would lay off and hire every so often. What's worse is that I figured out they were profitable. They were basing their demands on falling short of projected targets, not actually losing money. AKA bullcrap numbers made up to justify bullying involuntary donations from the employees for added margin. Story 36. Last summer, my best friend and also my grandfather was seriously ill and coming to the end of his life with kidney failure. I worked part-time at a garden center at the time while also managing my studies. For about a month, I spent every night at the hospital by his bedside, and only leaving took to work. Every day in work, I would explain to my boss what's going on and that at some point in the next few days, I will be letting him know that I need some time off. Anyway, days went on. My granda was immensely strong-willed and lasted much longer than expected. Doctors were absolutely fascinated at it. The day came, and he had finally passed away. My sister broke the news to me via phone call. I was in work at the time and immediately walked over to my boss and explained what happened and that I needed to go and be with my family. He looked at me and laughed while explaining, "You've already spent enough time with him this month. Do you think I'd let you go see the person who's made you this tired the past month?" And he left the shop explaining that if I didn't stay to finish and close up properly, I needn't come back tomorrow. As an act of revenge, as soon as he left, I closed the gates to the center, ordered in 100 pounds worth of Domino's with the company card, and brought all the pizzas to my family. Never seen him again. Story 37. I worked for a large cable company, rhymes with Romcast. I worked in their corporate office. When the call center and supervisors couldn't help you, you called me. Well, this one lady called me because she was being denied service at a new address. The woman had 5 previous Romcast accounts at different addresses. She would start service, not pay, and just wait to be cut off. Her bill for all addresses was over $900. The only way she could get service was to pay her past balances, as everyone prior had told her. When you get to the corporate office, it means you have probably already talked to about 50 other people and not gotten what you wanted. Well, I talked to my office staff and explained to her, the account is flagged until she pays the balances off. I was able to offer her to only pay of $300 up front, and we would be allowed to extend her payment date for the rest. She refused, said she wasn't paying us anything. We were just going to start her account. After about an hour of arguing and explaining it doesn't work like that, no one could do that for her, since I was told that by management and its company policy, the call ended. 10 minutes later, my boss calls me in his office, says she called back into corporate and complained again. He made me call her back and tell her I was wrong and that we would waive the entire thing, after them telling me we would never do this. He could have easily called her since we had a heated conversation about it earlier, but no. He made me look like an a-hole and call her back with my tail between my legs and basically bow down to her. Why would you even want someone's business that has a proven record of never paying you a cent? Story 38. Worked as a carny, person operating the attractions at a fun fair. Cash in hand job, paid at the end of the week. Supposed to be 10 hours workday, with 1 day off a week, with an hour break during the day. It was significantly less than minimum wage, but hey, I was willing to take whatever income I could get. Ignoring all the health and safety violations going on, that hour break? Yeah, that didn't exist. Nor did that day off, and it was a 12-hour workday. 1 week, a significant part of my payment was in counterfeit currency. A coworker got off worse. Entire pay packet was full of fakes. Just had to suck it up and move on. Another week, I was moved to another attraction without being given any instruction on how to operate it for a couple of days, which scared me crapless because it moved fast and contained people. The controls were not exactly complicated, but still, you are meant to be trained on safety, etc. Duck seasonal work anyway. Story 39. Our GM walked out, and to keep the restaurant afloat, 2 investors came in to run the place. They were horrified by the way we ran things, so they were being hard asses all day and threatening all our jobs. A bottle of grill degreaser was left open and on the floor. I knocked it over during lunch rush, and it spilled all over my foot. I went to the bathroom to wash my foot, and the female investor told me to get back to my tables. I explained what had happened, and she said if I wasn't back on the floor in 2 minutes, I would be fired. I needed that job, and I'd never been fired before. I expressed concern that I had a chemical on my foot. She said it was only Windex and to get on the floor. Yeah, it was purple. But Duck, I thought I needed that job. So I worked with a foot soaking in degreaser for 5 more hours. When I got home, my sock was bloody and fused to my skin. I soaked it in the tub and gently removed the sock. My mother was horrified and told me to file a claim because I'd been hurt on the job. I went in the next day saying all the things my mom said I should, and they dismissed it. Said there was no way to prove that those wounds were a result of anything from work. I assumed this was true and didn't press the topic. My mom asked what happened, and I evaded it long enough. She eventually forgot. 10 years later, I have scars on my feet and the knowledge that they kept me from filing a claim because they didn't have insurance. Being naive and buckling under empty threats kept me from what, I assume, would have been a decent lawsuit settlement. Story 40. Worked at a small group home for 5 years. Fired for booking 3 days off for my toddler to have surgery. They knew I'm a single mom. I had ensured I had not booked more time off during the year than permitted. Know what it's like to be a suddenly unemployed single mom with a kid who needs surgery? Devastating. Story 41. My former boss didn't understand basic math, and we were all underpaid because of it. For example, if I worked 7 hours, 30 minutes, He would pay me for 7.3 hours instead of 7.5. It doesn't seem like much, but it added up quickly. I figured it out after looking at my paychecks closer, and it took weeks to explain to him how he was wrong. Luckily, I was reimbursed, and my coworkers were also, even though he begged me not to tell anyone. Story 42. I interned in state government while I studied for the bar exam. I took the exam and kept interning while awaited results. Meantime, wife got a job in the city we'd both grown up in and wanted to return to, so we planned to move. I gave my 2-week notice and offered to train a replacement. The intern coordinator fired me instead and called me unprofessional. Fast forward a few months. I passed the bar and interviewed for a state government job that I thought would be perfect for me. Went really well. Then I was called a week later and told they passed my name up the chain. This job requires approval from the governor's office. But it was rejected because I was on a government employment blacklist. I am permanently barred from state government employment because I gave 2 weeks' notice and offered to train a replacement for a low-skill internship that could have replaced me by the end of the day. Story 43. I had a boss pull me into a room after hours, tell me he was going to fire much of the team, and that while I was nearly indispensable, I couldn't receive inspiration from the Holy Ghost, because I was a goth at the time. He then went on to tell me it wasn't my fault. It was because society and culture imitate the blacks, and that they make great athletes and gladiators, but aren't the greatest thinkers. He got fired before I could sue him into oblivion. The company is defunct now. Story 44. I warned our company's directors of blatant customer credit card fraud, as well as time card fraud, that was resulting in people getting paid for hours that they spent in restaurants, coffee shops, and movie theaters. I got fired for it. Firing me split the company in half, and people started bailing right and left after that. Company folded less than a year later for the exact reasons I'd warned them about. Story 45. I was once told by my immediate supervisor that I was being demoted, so my pay was decreasing by $1 the day before payday. I asked him when that went into effect since I was still doing the job I had been promoted for. He told me he didn't know, but he'd look into it. Very next day, I get my paycheck, and they had already cut my wage for the 2 weeks I just got paid for, and then for the week that I had just worked. I made an HR complaint, but the owner basically said that it was my word against his. They were both scum lords. Same boss told me on multiple occasions that things just weren't working out, and that I should just pack up and go, trying to make it sound like he was firing me because he wanted me to leave the premises so he could then fire me for job abandonment. I put up with this crap for a full year before I found a better job. Family and kids, only one working, and could not afford to be out of work for any period of time, so I couldn't just up and quit. However, when I did finally quit, the sales team that I was managing, promoted again, got my raise back, won the monthly contest. The owner took us out to bowling on a Friday, bought us all lunch, and then sent us home, paid for the rest of the day. I went home, wrote him email, and told him that I quit. Story 46. Well, my contract wasn't renewed because I wasn't Catholic. They claimed it was for other reasons, but I had excellent reviews from the administration the 3 years prior, so they started to document issues that last year. It coincided with the diocese getting a new bishop, so I think that has a lot to do with it. Also, because the school was considered a church, I couldn't get unemployment. Story 47. My boss started pushing me around and roughing me up in front of customers because I was in his way, ended up with a hit eye. I tried to be professional and play it off the customers. This was 2 days ago. So I'm currently writing a formal grievance letter. Hopefully he'll get fired. He's been suspended as of Thursday, pending investigation. The HR guy saw the CCTV and immediately suspended him, which is a win right now. Story 48. They decided to take taxes out of my paycheck but not give them to the government, so I got audited. It was pretty intense until the IRS realized they were auditing 20+ employees of the same employer. Story 49. My first job out of engineering school. I was maintenance supervisor at our company's biggest factory. It was supposed to be a rotational program, but they had a great need in the maintenance department. A corporate team contacted me and offered me a job that would move me to California and give me a pretty good raise. The plant director, top guy at the factory, pulled me into his office and convinced me that I should stay running my part of the maintenance department, that it would be better for my career in the long run. He convinced me, and I stayed. About 2 weeks later, I let someone into the front office who said he was interviewing. I asked him what position, and he tells me maintenance supervisor. I was shocked. I asked the plant director, and he sheepishly told me that the maintenance manager wanted to replace me after plant director convinced me to stay. The reason he wanted to replace me is he was a lazy hole and I did most of his job. You would think that would be a reason to keep me, but he started getting offended when corporate/lead techs would defer to me for decisions instead of him. He moved me into a way crappier position then. I've pretty much never been madder in my life. Story 50. I was working at a Hardee's in my senior year of high school. I got my only Saturday school ever because I was sneaking out of school early to get to work. My manager wouldn't schedule me according to my school hours, and when I asked to be pushed back an hour, She said I would work the hours she gave me or leave. Then I got in trouble and told her what happened and asked again to be scheduled an hour later. She told me, "You're 18 now. You don't even have to go to school anymore." Right! I'm gonna drop out of high school so I can work at a Ducking Hardee's for the rest of my life. I put my 2 weeks notice in the next day. Story 51. My last job, I started out as a temp worker. While I was temping, they posted the job for applications and I applied. I figured I'd get the job for sure since I'd already been doing it for 3 months. I got an interview. All went well. Well, a week or so later, I'm told that they decided to hire someone else, but that they would like for me to stay on for 2 extra weeks to train the new person. WTF? They didn't want to hire me for the position, but I'm good enough to train the new person. I called the temp agency and let them know what was going on and asked them to find me something else as soon as possible. Well, a few days later, I'm still temping. My supervisor calls me in to let me know that the lady they offered the job to took a different position, so they are now offering it to me. I should have known better, but I went ahead and took the job because permanent employment paid better. I was there for 4 years and barely got out without a nervous breakdown. Story 52. Just recently had my yearly review at work and my manager said, "You're doing great. You catch on to everything really well and really fast. You did great when we lost 2 people in your department, leaving you alone after 3 months. When you had interview prospective replacements and trained the new hire, you did a fantastic job. When we changed our support model 2 months ago and we asked you to learn 3 new subjects you've never been trained for, you stepped and took the task by the rein. I know we're supposed to meet every month for a catch-up and we've only met up twice in the 8 months you've been here, but I always know I can count on you to be here and do a great job. So I'm only going to give you a meets expectation because you haven't stepped out and brought ideas to the table. I keep getting told by other managers that because we just changed support models and because I'm doing extra work on top of what I was hired for, that we don't have time to implement my ideas. Maybe in a few months." He said, "Well, you didn't tell me." Are you ducking kidding me? We never meet. I keep getting shifted around and shot down. Oh, and there's the one time I walked in on my old boss masturbating in the office. Story 53. I'm a software engineer / web developer. Depends which job I'm talking about. My last job, it all came to a head when we took an old VB.NET application and converted the entire thing to a C#.NET MVC application. We beat the estimate by like 3 months. So we started implementing new things and doing all sorts of enhancements to make testing teams, base, and clients happy. So a little background, at this point I had been on the project longer than anybody, by 1 week, but hey, and we had just hired a new guy. We started him off doing simple tickets, verbiage changes, or color alterations that would take 5 minutes if he was lazy. I was working on implementing a brand new feature, which required its own page, controller, 3 submodels, and a hell of a lot of fancy JavaScripting in the background to make it all work. So imagine my surprise when my formerly kick-ass boss calls me into the office and informs me I'm being written up. Why? The new guy was closing more tickets than me, so I was obviously being a lazy craphead. I was furious. It was the last straw for me. I started looking for a new job immediately. Story 54. Pete's Fresh Market, a Chicagoan grocery chain owned by pure scum. The owner's brother, George, is an abuser. He also happens to be the general manager of whatever store his brother moves him to at any given moment. The owner's daughter, whose name I don't remember, is the head of HR and routinely ignores complaints of harassment. The owner himself has been quoted in labor complaints as having told workers that he could lost them if he wanted to, and nobody would give a crap. I had 4 friends who worked there. All were fired for stealing, something they only agreed to after being locked alone in a darkened office for the duration of the shift in which they were to be fired. The police have been called to investigate. There have been numerous complaints filed, but somehow the evidence just goes missing. The people who own Pete's Fresh Market are disgusting criminal scum, and they deserve to be called out on it. Oh, and they're shameless union busters too. Just all-around turds, basically. That whole family. Story 55. A coworker old enough to be my dad made advances on me that I clearly did not want. Like, he followed me to a bar uninvited and tried to get with me advances. Let my husband know, and he politely reminded the guy, while he went through his line, that I was married and not up for grabs. Management threw a fit. My husband said something to him, and then told me I was being promiscuous by being too nice and polite to the guy who worked at a grocery store, and absolutely had to be nice to everyone. They then attempted to ban my husband from the store and wrote me up instead. They never did anything to the guy. I wound up being fired for something I said off the clock and outside of the building while chatting with a coworker that had nothing to do with work. Someone overheard me cuss and got me fired. I was making $15 an hour. Story 56. I used to work at a Subway in a small Wisconsin town. It was hell. The 2 worst things, I was 15 and did not have a car or a bike. It was a 30-minute walk to work. I was regularly scheduled for 1-hour shifts at $6 per hour, which, BTW, was below minimum wage. And it was after the legal 90-day training period. By far the worst, though, was when I finally had a review and was getting a 50-cent raise. A few nights later, it was hella busy, lined to the door for 2 hours. There was some high school football game or something. The shift leader said me and the other non-shift leader, would have to stay late to help close because of how behind we were on everything. I was a pretty hard-working employee at the time, and cheerfully agreed. I got a call the next day from the store manager who chewed me out and said I should have known better than to listen to the shift leader and should have just left. I had the extra hour I was there docked from my paycheck, and they took away my raise. That was the last time I did anything that even remotely resembled hard work there. Story 57. When I was in my early 20s, I worked for a car dealership as a new car prep person. The supervisor of the area was an old German immigrant who would curse at us in German anytime he did not like what we were doing. On my last day, I had an accident with a company car, so he starts to berate me in German and then tells me I'm fired. I looked at him and in German asked him if he was so stupid as to think no one working for him would ever know German. I was born there and, while not fluent, could understand the insults he was throwing out. Story 58. I worked for this company for almost 2 years. I always arrived to my shift despite having the flu and puking. My line of work could care less how sick you are. Always covered shifts if needed, etc. I was a great employee. They knew I have bad anxiety attacks, and one day, I woke up with horrific anxiety. I was too scared to drive because my panic attacks can leave me crippled, and it's not safe, especially when I was supposed to pick up a client from day program. I called for over 2 hours until I finally got a hold of my manager. She was pissed and said I needed to bring in a doctor note. She knew I didn't have health coverage and couldn't afford to be seen. I expressed this the next day and she said it was too bad and wrote me up. I gave my 2 weeks along with that write-up. I felt so betrayed and hurt. So many employees had requested days off. I never did. Called in sick, wouldn't cover shifts, etc. And there I was being treated like I didn't matter. Story 59. Oh, you know, the whole work overtime and don't get paid because you're salary bullcrap. Turns out the labor department didn't agree with that guy, haha. I was amazed at how quick I got my money. Granted, it was about 15% of what I should have had. Just to clarify, I quit before everyone else and ended up getting a call a month or two later. They were pretty damn thorough. Story 60. Working for a Silicon Valley startup, they terminated me on Friday at the end of a pay period. Didn't pay me for work completed and outstanding vacation, thousands in reimbursements that had accrued over 6 months, no severance, nothing. They also tried to get me to sign a termination letter, waiving a bunch of my rights and saying they didn't owe me any of the above until they got another round of investment funding. Story 61. I worked as a fry cook at a mom-and-pop catfish joint, back when the minimum wage was around $5.25 or so. I was a sophomore in high school. One day, without discussion, warning, etc., my pay was cut from $6 per hour to $3 per hour with tips. Nobody said anything until the new rate showed up on our paychecks. The way the restaurant was set up, there was zero table service, and you had better chances of being tipped at a McDonald's. Worst part, the owner didn't compensate the difference if you didn't tip out equal to minimum wage. Essentially, I made $3 an hour, 100% illegal on the owner's part. I quit damn near immediately, and never got to save up for my own car the way I wanted to before graduating because of that, a hole. Duck you, Kyle, and duck your catfish. It was, and still is to this day, the best fried fish I've ever had. But duck your fish. It closed and became a taco casa. Good. Story 62. Laid me off before I had a chance to fill out an expense report. Had to make some deliveries on a Wednesday, laid me off Friday. I was pissed. Was so overwhelmed that I didn't realize until weeks later. Story 63. Once I got robbed when I was working for a certain fatherly pizza chain. When I got back to the store afterwards, the manager said that he was going to withhold my tips to replace the money that was from the store, gives drivers for change. This happened early in my shift, so I hadn't racked up much, so he told me I had still to pay the remaining difference of the money stolen and pay for the order that was undelivered because it was stolen. I told the manager, duck off, and left. Story 64. My boss's brother died, so for 6 weeks we were doing 70-plus hour weeks to cover for him. On his return, my mother died and I was sacked for taking a week off. Story 65. I was hired for and promised full-time hours. After about a month of online getting 24 hours over 3 to 4 days a week, I complained to my boss. His solution was then giving me 24 hours over 6 to 7 days a week. I quit a few weeks later and dealt with passive-aggressive comments about how they tried to work with me, and this is how I thanked them. I didn't show up for my last shift. Story 66. I used to work at a private preschool when I got very, very sick. I ended up hospitalized for about 3 months, including recovery time. I had FMLA and was guaranteed a position when I recovered. So as I'm letting my boss know I can come back, she says, "You're welcome back, but I have no hours for you." So I said, "Nope, I'll get unemployment instead. I'm so much happier now. Story 67. Give me glowing reviews during yearly reviews, then make the rest of my year hell with all the mistakes I made. With the last one, I got the usual glowing review, then fired for a mistake I didn't even make. Employers of Reddit. What was the most satisfying "you're fired" you ever uttered? Story 1. So, my most satisfying "you're fired" moment was with an employee who had been with the family business for about 4 years. He had also been surreptitiously stealing from us for 3 of those years. We switched over to a new system, and he just kept doing what he had been doing. We went back and checked the records and added up his total theft to be just below grade, a grand theft for our state. So we sat on it, trying to decide what to do for a day, and by the time we acted, he had moved himself up to grade A grand theft. The felony charge, I'm guessing, is still sticking to this day, and we got all our money back. We had 3 months of records that we could prove with the new system equals just a little more than $2,500. The previous 3 years was soft evidence that couldn't be used, but we knew was also theft. Story 2. Addict who thought he was smooth enough to steal merchandise and sell it behind the store. Told him he was fired right as the cops were handcuffing him. Best part was I got an award for finding the source of the in-house theft and a pay raise. Story 3. Young person very pleased with himself. Went to the best schools, universities, well looked after by mom and dad. Chose him from a large and strong field of economics graduates. First week in the job, he made a point of taunting and boasting to his ex-employer about his new job. First warning sign. After 6 months, he was a nightmare of self-absorption. Quality of his work was very poor, and any menial task was groaned at. Got into the unfortunate habit of surreptitiously denigrating the people who were paying his bills, me. Was silly enough to circulate or print these emails internally, which, when found, often, were collected and filed by my assistant. I particularly enjoyed the one to his interstate mates about how much of an arsehole I was, how much I was being paid, and that I drove around loving myself in my Porsche. I actually drove a 1978 Toyota Corolla. On the anniversary of his much-anticipated pay review and the eve of his fancy overseas trip, I kept him back late and called him into my office and calmly handed over the emails and said, "You left these on the printer. Enjoy your holiday and don't bother coming back." Story 4. When I did security at a hospital years ago, we had an idiot coworker who literally did everything he could to sabotage everything he could while at work. He was a full-time crap disturber and a criminal who wound up eventually going to jail for defrauding the government. I did not fire him, but I wound up making the complaint that got him fired. I had a supervisor who refused to act on anything whenever there was a complaint about this guy, including if it was something really serious like stealing substances from the hospital. He always said something like, "I promise I'll look into it," and then did nothing. To be fair, there were a lot of supervisors who were like this, including the supervisor of this particular crap disturber. My supervisor wound up getting hit by a drunk driver being chased by the police, and I got his position. My mind was made up that Troublemaker would be gone within a week. I was either going to catch him stealing, or he was going to pull some stupid stunt, and I was going to call him on it. Turned out to be the latter. I show up for work one day, and the front desk calls me on the phone to say they have an emergency where everyone working the front desk was getting sick and they needed me cover for them. When I get there, I find out why. That idiot Troublemaker was instructed to install a strobe light for safety for the entrance, where the ambulances enter. Instead of installing it outside, he installed the strobe light right on top of the reception desk, with the light going off right in everybody's faces. No wonder everyone was getting sick. The Troublemaker justifies doing this by making up some bullcrap. It's the only spot within direct line of sight to the outside doors where the light can be installed within code. I knew that was a blatant lie. He's just getting his jollies ducking with us, and he knows his own supervisor is useless, who won't do anything. So I called the supervisor down with much threats and cajoling, I might add, just to get him to show up. Explain the situation, I tell him. It's completely intolerable, and to take action. I knew he was going to do nothing. He's wearing a tool belt and can remove the strobe light in a matter of seconds if he wanted to. He didn't want to. He was all, "We'll take it under advisement, duck off-ish." He says he needs me to write a letter before he can take any action at all. Afterwards, he explained we'll have a meeting and a discussion and duck in PowerPoint presentation before arsing ourselves to actually do anything. I was prepared for this. Right after he gives me the brush off, I took a hammer out of my desk and smashed all the strobe lights right in front of him. I swept all the pieces into a 9x12 envelope and handed it to him. "There's your duck and complaint letter. And if the Troublemaker pulls this crap again, I will smash the lights again. And I'm assured by the site supervisor the cost of replacing them is coming out of your budget. So duck off and get rid of that idiot." And all of the incident reports against that guy my former supervisor was sitting on all this time, I followed up on every single one of them. I flooded the desks of both the guy's supervisor and the on-site supervisor, and I sent all the criminal incident reports against this guy to the RCMP, not the local municipal police, partly because the municipal cops are a useless bag of ass and the accusations of theft tallied to over $5,000 of stolen medics, which makes it a federal case. Story 5, I was the night manager for a subway, and with that came very little added responsibility, but I had the ability to fire someone at my discretion. Only, of course, if I had just cause. Well, this one girl was downright disgusting. Came into work smelling like straight feces, untidy, looking like a hobo that was beaten on the regular. One shift she managed to upset a customer to the point of tears, and I found my opportunity. We cannot keep you anymore. Please leave, and I'll send you your pay at the end of the week. Not the best story of firing somebody, but for me that was the most rewarding. Story 6. I supervised a group home for adults with developmental disabilities. I found an employee who was stealing from the residents. Couldn't wait to fire her. Was asked for the story. The clients had a community pool for groceries, and she was spending hundreds over a couple of months for her own groceries out of that money. I suspected other things, but that was the smoking gun. Story 7. I fired a guy by telling him he was obviously too skilled to work under me and should be running a kitchen by himself. He found a new job and thanked me. Story 8. Turns out firing someone isn't as satisfying as you would think. At best, a horrible employee makes it easier to come to that decision, but I can't say I have ever felt satisfaction in firing someone. Story 9. One of my employees was selling substances through my internet cafe while on shift. I had my night guy come in with me, went behind the counter, and asked her to come talk to me outside. She asked, "Who is going to watch the till? Sandy?" We went outside, and I asked her if I could buy an ounce off her. She said, "Just a sec, I'll get you some." "Hey, don't bother." "What? You're fired." Story 10. We had a software developer intern at my last company that we had to fire. He was with us as part of a co-op program, full-time, semester-long, paid internships. And for the first 4 of his 5 months, he was doing okay work. Not stellar, but certainly above average. For his last month, we decided to give him a project of his own to work on for our new software. It was pretty simple, just a plugin that could get emails from POP3/IMAP and parse them for information for our database. A week in, he started working from home, saying he had to babysit his little brothers. He'd come to work pretty much every other day, and the days he came in, he was super late, sometimes not getting in until afternoon. This became ritual, and we started to get concerned, so we asked him to make a better effort to come into the office on time. Over the course of his project, we always asked if he had any questions about what he was doing. He always took notes when we discussed something, and he seemed to know what we wanted. We figured he was getting along just fine. Well, we should have seen the warning signs. At the end of his co-op, we decided we'd do a code review of the stuff he had written for his plugin. We set up the projector in the conference room, had him bring his laptop, etc. When we were all ready, he plugged his laptop into the projector and showed us his code. It was one class, 80 lines long, copied from a tutorial on the internet. The room was silent. All the code did was fetch emails and print them to the screen. It didn't do anything we wanted it to, despite our best efforts to make sure he had all the info he needed. My boss and I had the other developers leave the room. We asked him why he didn't have more code. He didn't have answers. He just stared at his feet and shrugged. Since it was the last day of his internship, we couldn't fire him per se, but we told him we weren't bringing him back in the fall and that he was clocking out early. He cried as he left. Honestly, it was one of the worst feelings in my life. Firing someone is hard. We wasted over $2,000 on him that month for literally nothing, and that's before employer-side taxes. We should have been livid, angry, all kinds of other harsh emotions. Really, we were just disappointed in him. We thought he could be responsible, but he let us down. Sure, there are people in this thread that are going to talk about their crackhead employees, their weapon-wielding coworkers, the drama queens and drama kings that didn't get their way. But when it comes to firing someone, there is nothing satisfying about it. If you found it satisfying, good for you. I just won't think you're a good person. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done to another human being ever in my life, and I hope I'm good enough at hiring people in the future that I never have to do it again. Story 11. I was supervising a call center in the early 2000s, and we were still manually dialing numbers off of paper call sheets. Had a new guy who hadn't converted a call yet. After a few days. We did surveys. So I listened in to see how his introductions sound. First call, answering machine. Second call, hello? I know where you live, pussy, biatch. Of all the hundreds of calls this kid made, I catch that one on the second try. Holy jeez. I called him in the office and was like, dude, you can't work here anymore. Why not? Because I didn't get any surveys? No, because you said, I know where you live, pussy Karen. The look in his eyes said it all. He left calmly and without incident. Story 12. Forklift driver took out a ceiling-mounted furnace on his second day by ignoring his training, experience, and common sense. It wasn't a tough decision. Story 13. I didn't do the firing, but I did see it happen. I used to do mechanical maintenance at a brewery in NZ while I was studying. A chain on a conveyor kept coming off, and it was very difficult to put back on, so it would usually end in the packaging line shutting down and all the staff got to go home early with pay. We decided to set a camera up to try and capture how the chain kept coming off, as we were at a loss to explain how it kept breaking. Turns out, an employee that didn't feel like working the rest of the day would jam a metal pole between the chain and drive sprocket. He didn't know about the camera, and we got everything on tape. Story 14. I never micromanaged my employees, and I always gave them a lot of discretion in how they did their jobs. So I get a new contract to hire guy, but he seems to be gone from his desk way too much. After a few days of this, I use my admin credentials to log onto his computer to see what he's working on. Bottom line, there's an email to a girl where he tells her that he parks his car in the basement away from everyone, and he goes there to nap. I find him in the basement, sleeping in his car, tap on the glass, and just ask for his door key card. The look on his face was like a little boy. He knew he was totally busted. There is a lot of conjecture on this one, so let me clear up some things. Where we were located, there was no privacy expectation law. I was free to examine his computer. He was not an employee, but was an hourly contractor. By sleeping in the car, he was most certainly being paid for not working. Story 15. New secretary promo model came to a Las Vegas event with us to help promote, disappeared with a guy for the rest of the weekend, and stopped answering her phone. She didn't even fly back home with us. The next Tuesday, she didn't show up on Monday. When she showed up for work, I got the green light to can her. I believe she ended up moving to Las Vegas for the guy, then become an escort. Story 16. I have 2 stories. I work a 3 a.m. custodial shift at a fancy schmancy restaurant bar 7 days a week. Finding people to work competently alongside me at this time is a nightmare. The first one was a girl who I somewhat knew that was looking for a job, and considering we were desperate to find people, we had multiple people disappear after their first night, and we need at least 2 people working to finish the place on time before they open around 10 a.m. I gave her a shot. I knew it was probably temporary, but I absolutely needed someone to help. I hadn't known the girl very well. She seemed nice and fairly normal in our previous encounters, though. Needless to say, she ended up being batcrap crazy, and it was kind of rubbing off on me. She would tell me and my boss that she could easily solo this place every night since she worked 60 hours a week at her previous job, blah, blah, blah. And I knew it was complete bullcrap, considering she couldn't clean a sink without getting distracted and running off to switch mop heads, which we had. Already switched 2 times already. I didn't want to hurt her feelings by calling her out, so I just let it happen. The third night, she texted me 1 hour before we had to go in. "Go duck yourself, Pompey," I text her back. "So, are you coming in?" She obviously didn't reply and never came in. The next morning, she asked me for my boss's number. I text her, "Yeah, here's the number." Like, "Oh, and by the way, you really lived up to your word about showing up every night." Sarcasm, she replied. "My word means nothing to someone I don't trust." At this point, I was pissed, so I text her, "Your word clearly means nothing to anyone, especially me or my boss." I felt bad because she clearly had some serious mental instability, but I got a text back from her saying, "Why do I have to explain myself to you?" I reply, "You don't, you're fired." That felt pretty great. The next diamond in the rough employee we hired was a 40-year-old youth pastor who had some experience cleaning. Mind you, I'm 23 years old, and it was my first time in a management position. So I had been forewarned that it may be a little rough trying to manage someone much older than me. Anyway, things started out fairly well as I walked him through. He seemed like an okay guy, but his reactions to me when I would show him little tips and things we were supposed to do were that of blatant disrespect. I am the manager, and he had known this. Eventually, towards the end of the morning, I simply asked him if he had done a part of the bathroom that we were supposed to do. He replied, "I wasn't born yesterday, man." I was sort of taken aback by it, and when I went to check if he had done it, he obviously hadn't. I let it slide, though, and we finished the morning with him basically sitting on his phone, already done doing his tasks as I finished my part. I absolutely hate when people lack the decency to help and lack any sort of teamwork thought process. I had been nothing but kind to him, and all I received was disrespect. The final task was to take the trash out to the dump, so I led him to the dump and asked him, "So, how are you liking this job?" He says, "I don't mind the job. It's just you, man, your mannerisms." I was fed up at the end of a long night and laughed right after he said it, then looked him dead in the eyes and asked what it was that I was doing wrong and tried explaining to him it was my first time managing and I could use some tips. He just kept ranting about how I was disrespectful and I lacked mannerisms like saying please and thank you. I started to laugh at every little thing he would say as we walked to our cars, and this really ticked him off. He got into his car and honked at a dump truck that was behind him, and currently dumping a large trash container into it as if the dump truck was just going to move for him. Needless to say, it didn't move for him, and I hopped in my car and drove off. I told my boss what happened, and my boss told him it wasn't going to work out. He then proceeded to send my boss a long email about how my boss had reeked of alcohol upon their first meeting and how I was a terrible manager. My boss is a former alcoholic, so this hit him pretty hard. And it was the first time I had heard my boss swear profusely to me as he vented to me about this youth pastor. Needless to say, I never saw the youth pastor again. And it built my boss and I's relationship to where I got a significant raise in a part-time counseling position. My boss now vents to me often. I enjoy it. Story 17. I once hired this guy who was just absolutely sure he always was the smartest guy in every room, but he was quite stupid and thought he was slick. But I needed employees in this yogurt shop I ran, so I kept him on, but only when I worked there, it was my business. Once all of his friends came in after one of his shifts with totally full punch cards, which of course he supplied, so I had to give them whatever they wanted. But finally, once this guy was on staff and I had to go out, I came back to nothing, having been rung up for an entire hour, but the register had been opened over a dozen times. Clearly theft. So I sat him down, and as he thought he was such a super smart guy with the brightest of futures, I told him, "Well, I think it's time I make you vice president." You should have seen his eyes light up. "Yep, you're VP of garbage collection. Now go change all the garbage and pick up all the refuse in the parking lot. Oh, and I'm only gonna need you for an hour a week at the most." The look of confusion on his face was quite priceless. Duck you, Justin. Story 18. I had a contractor, not an employee, but close enough. He was helping me fix up a house, and he wasn't really doing it right, quality too low for what I had in mind, but he was trying real hard and had a hard luck story. At first it was great, as he was working hard and I paid him at the end of the week. Then for some reason he started working less and less. I think he just got bored by the work, not sure why the drop-off in quality and time. I was only around 3 days out of 5 days, worked at another site the other days, and I quickly figured out his work, when I wasn't around, was far inferior. I suspect he was only coming in for half days. So I said money was tight, so he could only work the 3 days I was there. I thought he might read between the lines and realize I was onto his increasing laziness and work hard those 3 days. It didn't happen. For various reasons, we worked very different hours, working 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and me from noon to about 10 p.m. He started just coming in around 11:30, I'm guessing, and sitting in his car until I got there. When I arrived, he jumped out of his car with a fast food drink in hand and acted like he'd just got back from an early lunch. It worked the first time, but I found it hard to believe he'd just gotten back from lunch, 3 workdays in a row, and of course, very little work was done when I got there. Finally, I said, due to really tight money, he could only come in the actual hours I was there, as his work when I was physically there was still sorta okay. The very next workday, he is there. When I arrive, does the just got back from lunch thing with the fast food soda, says he knows what I said, but got there the usual time anyhow, and can I pay him the full day, and gives me a hard luck story about how he needs the money. If he needs money, why isn't he just doing the work? He then works for like 10 minutes and says he has to pick up his son from school, but he'll be right back. Comes back half an hour later with his son, like 5 years old and cute as a button, but he isn't getting any work done with his son there. He says now he has to watch his son and can't work anymore today. But can I pay him for a full day's work, and he'll come back a day I'm not there and work a few more hours. I pay him for the day up to that point and say money is really, really tight and I can't use his services anymore. He starts to ask about more work and I just say, no, I'll do the rest without him. He was a dummy, but he knew this was a you're fired moment. Hey, I paid him for about 4 hours worth of work when he actually only had worked 20 minutes. What did he really expect? Hated to fire him since he at first had worked really hard. He also had a son and some other children and some obvious bad money problems. He was also a really lousy worker and I just couldn't keep paying him for doing nothing. It was a satisfying, you're fired, but felt bad anyhow. By the way, I never said you're fired, just money is tight, I can't use your services. But even this dummy knew what it meant. Story 19, an employee was hit his girlfriend in the break room as I casually walked past and was like, what the duck? You can't do that crap, man. He tells me it's none of your business. Unfortunately for him, I was both of their supervisors, and it was, in fact, my business. So after about 5 minutes of threats, I locked myself and the girl in the office and called the cops. Unbeknownst to me, he also had warrants. So, bonus. I walk out and try to reason with him until I see the cops pull in the drive, and right around the same time he takes his shirt off, throws it at me, and says, meet me outside if you're a real man, and storms out. That's how BK employees initiate that they'd like to fight. Not the first time I've been in this situation. He didn't see the cops around the corner and instantly got detained as he walked outside. While he was being cuffed, I leaned out the door and said, hey, I don't know if you knew, but you're fired. We'll mail your check. He was crying like a Karen in the back of the cop car while they talked to the girl. It was absolutely beautiful. For anyone wondering, last I knew they are still dating. Story 20. Sadly, I didn't get to do this, but I heard the story from one of my favorite bosses. Our lead character is a particularly nasty little piece of work. He's creepy to women, a bully to several, and extremely gifted at alienating people. He got a job as a driver on a fairly decently budgeted movie. My friend didn't want to employ him, but this guy had weaseled in with some of the top people. Partway into production, he got told by my friend to drive one of the production cars back to the office. On the way, he was told to fill it up with diesel. He pulled into a service station and went to fill it up. The car had lost its diesel tank cover and a cheap plastic one was in its place that read petrol. So the bozo jammed a petrol pump into the tank, not noticing it didn't fit properly, and filled it up. He then drove the car back to the office, which was an hour-plus drive. For those who don't know, petrol and diesel cars is a really bad idea. The damage to the engine was estimated to be 5 figures worth, and the source of the error was traced back to Bozo. If he had have come clean, he would have been fine. If he had have apologized, he would have been forgiven. When he got called into the office, he came in like a big swinging banana, swearing at everyone within earshot, and tried to pin the blame on my friend. He was so obnoxious about it that he was terminated on the spot. TL, doctor putting petrol into a diesel-run car is bad. Being a giant bellend after doing it gets you fired. Story 21. Not actually fired, but nearly as satisfying. Working in a modestly unsuccessful pizza shop with this kid was bazonkers. He clearly had a histrionic personality disorder combined with God knows what else. Every day he'd show up and tell a tragic story. The problem was he used the same staple of about a dozen stories every time. Thrown out of his house, friend killed in motorcycle accident, aunt diagnosed with cancer, had to go to a funeral in Scranton, Pa of all places. He always needed your attention for every little thing. And if, for some reason, someone else was getting attention, he'd mimic them. For example, I had a bunch of medical problems, so every time I'd need off to go to the doctor, his father would have the same extremely rare medical problem or treatment, even down to an appointment with the same doctor if I happened to mention who it was, and he heard. He was a good worker, though, because he always needed your praise for everything, so he tried his hardest, though, of course, he'd go nuts at the first hint of criticism. One day we were busy, and no one would look at his lymph nodes to see if he had leukemia for the 20th time. So he sits down in the corner and starts crying and rocking back and forth while the rest of us go about our business. Another time, no one would acknowledge that he'd had to have his windshield replaced after it got hit by a rock for the 12th time. So on his next delivery, he decided he'd actually break his windshield. So he punched it and nearly slit his wrist. Blood literally everywhere, covering him, his car, and into the kitchen where, of course, he wants us to bandage him up while simultaneously loving every moment. Thankfully, he never tried that one again. Finally, after 8 or 9 months, I'm working alone in the kitchen on an extremely busy Friday night. A couple people called off, I think, and I was angry. And he comes back and wants to show me his drawings of the new tattoo he is getting. I somewhat more angrily than I should have tell him, I don't have time right now, and he gets upset and starts ranting about how he's not a drama queen, and no one will pay attention to him. And he goes on like this for about 5 minutes. Can't calm him down, and he finally asks me point blank if he's a drama queen. I've had enough by this point and bluntly state, everyone thinks you're a drama queen. Now he starts ranting about how he should quit, and I still can't get him calm. Finally, the phone rings, and I'm trying to talk to a customer, and he asks if he should just quit. So what do? I give him a thumbs up, and out the door he walks. Story 22 was called in as a consultant to develop new hire training program and train trainers for Fortune 500 company. I reported directly to the CEO and, after presenting my concept to him, was given carte blanche to develop as I saw fit and to use whatever resources I needed. Even though I was a consultant, I had authority over every call center employee, hundreds, except 3-man top management team just hired to fix systems and processes. Call center, it is a mail order/internet business, was a hen party, 95% women, all supervisory and management staff women, except the new 4-man top management team hired to fix things. Place was severely ducked up because all promotions were made based on who was whose friend, rampant incompetence, training first round of trainers in new material. I had requested an assistant to run projectors, do handouts, etc. while I trained, was given a woman I knew was incompetent because she wanted it so much. I should have refused her right there and gone there with the person I wanted. About an hour into the training, as she contradicted me in front of the class, explained her role, again, was support, not training during a break, corrects me again twice more before lunch. She didn't like the fact that I had rewritten some procedures, so was correcting me with the old procedures. Had another talk at lunch, thought things were fixed, gets flat out argumentative in front of class within 15 minutes, sent class out for unscheduled break, directly told her she worked for me, and that her job was to assist with the new training program and keep her mouth shut. She started about arguing about the program. Went around with her for 10 minutes, repeating myself in ever more direct terms. She didn't get it. Some people just don't know when to shut the duck up and do their job. Me. Okay, it's clear you don't like the new program and are not only not going to support it, but intend to sabotage it. You're fired. Finally, she's speechless. She leaves. Her direct supervisor, the woman who selected her to be my assistant, comes over 2 minutes later, full of righteous indignation that I have fired her friend and telling me I have no authority to do so. Told her to get me XXX now, as he was now my assistant. Told her she worked for me, and that if she was unhappy about that, I could fix it. I'm normally pretty easygoing, but I'd had enough incompetence. Apparently, she didn't know I had life and death authority over her. Just then, the new head of the call center comes into the training room. Her. He fired XXX and says he's my boss. Him. He's the boss of everybody in this call center. Is there a problem? Her. No, sir. Hustles off to get my new training assistant. Never before or since have I ever enjoyed firing anyone. It's tough even when they totally deserve it. I did absolutely enjoy firing the Karen who didn't know when to STFO story 23. I worked at a department store in 10th to 12th grade. Over those 3 years, I worked myself up to weekend night manager. I had the ability to fire people, but only for a damn good reason. I had an employee, the same age as I, who often was seen in her car having sex with her boyfriend on what was supposed to be a 15-minute break and generally was gone for much longer. Her boyfriend called in sick for her while they were very obviously having sex. Told him getting laid is not a valid sick excuse, and if she doesn't find someone to swap or come in, then she's fired. I had another guy who was an acquaintance of mine in school. He'd slack about thinking he could get away with it because we had a few classes together. He was dating another girl at the store, and they were constantly fighting, both of them at fault. One day, they started yelling at each other from 2 cash registers while taking care of customers. I fired both of them. Story 24. As a former HR manager, I terminated a number of employees. I can truly say that I didn't enjoy any of them. In most cases, these employees have a family that depends on them for income and stability. In many of those cases, particularly employees with long tenure, I tried to find ways to make them successful before terminating their employment. Often, I was successful, and that's a good feeling, far more satisfying than firing them. My own philosophical bent is that management is responsible for everything that happens, good or bad. If an employee performs well, has good attendance, is well motivated, then management gets the credit. If the employee fails in any of these categories, then management gets the blame. The employee equally gets the credit or blame. It is the responsibility of management to select the right employee for the work. Management must train them and ensure that they can do the work efficiently and safely. Management needs to ensure the employee is motivated to perform well, and so on. My pet peeve is that most managers do not understand their job. They often believe that their primary function is to catch employees breaking the rules or not performing to an acceptable level. Managers who are looking for a gotcha moment. What the manager fails to realize is that his employee's failure is a direct reflection of the manager. What management should do is try to find ways to make employees successful in their job. Consider this. In a 5-day per week job, you work about 230 to 250 days per year. What if every manager did something, even a small thing, every day to make their employees successful? The cumulative effect could be significant. In our competitive environment, management needs to find better ways to do things. I can say that there were times that I silently said to myself, finally, when someone was terminated. But it was rare and always followed a sincere attempt to make the employee successful. In all of this, I'm not being critical of those who have taken some pleasure in firing someone. Some people really are gits, and we don't enjoy being around them. They bring everyone down a notch or two. I'm human just like everyone else, and I really was relieved to see some of those people gone. I think a fundamental difference is that I was just fortunate enough to have a few good mentors in my life and career. Story 25, never satisfying. All she did was cry. I mean, outright sob, though she was given 3 verbal, yellow sheet, and 3 more written warnings, pink. All she did was try to blame everyone around her for her poor work each time. Then I was accused of harassment after the firing. Lucky for me, the security supervisor, also a female, was just outside the conference room door the whole time, waiting to escort her out of the building. Door was open. The room was also under camera surveillance the whole time. Story 26. I managed a 4-screen cinema in a pretty rich town for a few years. I had one employee named Shane who was someone I hired just because I wanted to give him a chance and knew he wouldn't get it elsewhere. At one point, I started to notice a pattern that people would lose value items in the auditorium and they would never be recovered, even after looking myself. It really started to make sense when it would only happen on Shane's shifts. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to put my theory to a test. I took a $20 bill and a $5 bill and photocopied each one. I also wrote a message on the $20 bill at the bottom, so I knew it was mine. I then put the money, some business cards, and other useless things into the wallet. A movie gets out and had about 50 or so people in it, and as soon as the last person is out, I threw the wallet into the middle of the auditorium. I tell Shane and another employee, who was extremely honest and timid, to clean the theater. 10 minutes later, they both emerge, And the kid who was cleaning with Shane comes to me and hands over the wallet, saying he found it while cleaning. At this point, I thought my plan had failed until I opened it up and the money was missing. I then went into the office with my assistant manager and told him that someone took the money. I called both kids into the office and explained to them that something went missing and to empty the contents of their pockets onto the desk. The honest kid only had a pen, his cell phone, and a schedule, so I sent him back out. Shane starts getting nervous and is asking why we were doing it. I told him if he had nothing to hide, just show us, and that would be the end of it. He pulls out the $25 along with some other junk. I look at the money, and immediately he says that his dad gave that to him before work. I then told him to flip the $20 over and read it. I wrote, "You are fired," showed him the photocopies, and told him to turn in his uniform and punch out as he was going home. He was in shock that he finally got caught. Later that night, his dad came to the cinema and wanted to talk to me. I show him the security footage and the photocopies. His dad left and probably went home to punish him. It was pretty epic. Story 27. I was a supervisor at a summer camp. We had a field trip to a theme park, and I gave a pep talk explaining various methods to not lose a child. Buddy system, numbering the kids, having them hold a rope. The counselor in charge of the 6-year-olds did none of that. At the end of the day, she came back 20 minutes late, one kid short. Fortunately, another counselor from another group found the child. I pulled her aside and said, "You have one damn job. If I had my choice of leaving my son with you or a bum in front of a liquor store, I'd leave him with the bum, because for $10 he'd watch my ducking kid." She cried, and I took over her group until we found a suitable replacement. Story 28. Didn't particularly fire him, but got him to quit, take out a competitor. Managed a company that did YouTube content. Had a guy come in who was hands down the single most offensive person I have ever met. He was the literal embodiment of the internet tough guy. He was extremely overweight, lived in his mother's basement, and spent hours ranting on the Jews, blacks, anyone who ever made him feel like a piece of crap, which was easy to do as he was a piece of crap. Straight from the get-go, I told my partner I wanted nothing to do with this slobering cock-gobbler of a human being, but he was convinced we had a possible next Howard Stern, minus the intelligence or wit. So for weeks, I tried finding a way to get rid of black hole of human decency and finally settle of trying to get someone dumber than my partner to take this. At the time, we were in a rather heated competition with a competitor over content providers, and they would continually snipe any decent talent we picked up, as they could provide better rates. So for weeks, I called the owner of that channel, not a particularly smart man, just well situated in the YouTube network, and strike up conversations to promote inter-channel relations. During said conversations, I start bringing up this awesome new provider we just picked up, who's really pulling in a large amount of subscribers and how great he's working out. Sure enough, after about 3 to 4 weeks, Obese, a whole, basically gives everyone the middle finger and says he's switching channels and going to become the next YouTube millionaire, and that we can all go get ducked by a bunch of Nigers, you big-nosed Jews. Well, as soon as this git starts posting videos for his new boss, the entire network gets taken down for promoting hate crimes. Not only did this git snipe a producer that nobody followed, he was dumb enough to upload his videos with the main network's YouTube account, and subsequently violated YouTube's 3-strike policy and getting the network banned permanently. Last I heard, they had to rebrand and lost almost all their producers for signing on the human blob. Story 29. Addict who worked as my assistant manager. Found out she was regularly do substances in the bathrooms, stealing from my registers. She had a hit-and-run accident at 4 a.m. one morning and came to work after. Then at noon, the police showed up and cuffed her to take her to the station. She told the employee working with her to lie to me and tell me she was sick in the bathroom when I called. Lucky that employee called me, and I came in and sent her home while I figured out with her what to do. She keyed my car on the way out, came back for her next shift. "You're fired, yada, yada, yada." Security walked me to my car for a while. More fun details. She took the company to court with the Department of Labor for list wages and benefits. The company sent me, then 23 with no legal training, to represent us. All I got was 15 minutes of legal counsel the night before from an attorney in another state over the phone. She won. Story 30, one more story, again, not the employer. The setting is a low-budget horror movie. I spent pre-production volunteering in the art department in the hope of getting my first job. Others came and went. Day one of shooting, another guy joined the department, getting in because his dad was dating the producer. I didn't particularly like him, but I worked with him. He was very loud and opinionated, and forever saying how he thought things should be done. I knew about his connection to the producer, and so kept my mouth shut about him. 2 weeks into shooting, one of the department heads comes to me and asks what I think of him. I wonder what he's been saying about me, and say that we get along fine. A few days later, same department head comes back to me. This is after the guy has been mouthing off about the visual effects on the movie and what he thinks we should have done instead. I again say that we're fine, and the department head looks at me skeptically. "Because I think he treats you like a ducking idiot," he says, and walks off. Apparently, this guy had alienated the first assistant director, the third assistant director, the standby props guy, was loathed by the visual effects guy, and the two art department heads were cheerfully taking the piss out of him at every opportunity. Monday rolled around and there was no sign of him on set. Apparently, he'd been transferred to viral marketing about the film. TL. Know your place on a film set. Story 31. I used to manage a t-shirt shop. I had an employee who was rehired after having left years and years beforehand. When this employee was hired back, she did not receive seniority since her prior work with us had been over 5+ years back. She didn't like this. One night while I was working alone, we got absolutely slammed, and I didn't get around to finishing swing tagging the last 10 or so t-shirts in my pile for inventory. Clock out time rolls around, and I leave a memo on the counter for new or old employee asking her to finish up tagging the last few shirts when she comes in. As a sales associate, this is her job. The next day, she sends me a 4-part epic of a text message. Within the text, she straight up threatens me with bodily harm if I ever dare leave her crap to do like that again. She goes on to colorfully explain that her job isn't to do mine if I feel lazy, that I'm a scumbag for stealing her job, and that we're gonna have a problem the next time she sees me at work. She even went so far as to explain to me how the extra 5 to 10 minutes it took her to tag the shirts totally ducked up her flow, boohoo. Now, this on its own would have been grounds for a write-up. But since this wasn't her first outburst over doing her job and threatening people, I got to follow up her text with a phone call that went as such. Hey S, just sent that text over to boss's name. You won't need to worry about being in that sort of a situation ever again. You're fired. Felt good. Story 32. I didn't fire this guy, but I worked with him until he got fired this past Monday. He was lazy, overweight, pushing 250 when the job's weight limit is 275 pounds. And he had a shoulder injury, which he got on the job, which is fine. But it's something that normally heals fully within 3 months. And he had been on light duty because of it for the past 5 months, and said it would be another 6 months or more before he could do regular work again. He was very blaze about working light duty and had no shame about always taking the easiest job on the team. He spent at least 2 to 3 hours each workday browsing YouTube and conspiracy websites. He's a huge conspiracy nut, and distracting us from our work. Now, of course, we also slack off sometimes because there simply isn't enough work for us to do, but we jump to it when there's work to be done, and we're not dumb enough to use company iPads to browse the net at work. We know they can track that. Well, this guy got caught looking at adult film when security went through his web history. They were okay with YouTube and stock trading websites, but adult film is a big no-no. So he told them it wasn't him. He said it must have been someone else using his iPad when he left it unlocked. Not likely, but at least he didn't blame anyone specific and get them wrapped up in it. I can't say if he did it or not, but I can say that he showed me pictures of his ex-girlfriend, or so he said. Totally inappropriate, and I did not want to see it. So he was certainly looking at adult film on his iPad at least once. Well, they fire him, and a couple of days later, I get a phone call from him. He told me since I'm leaving in 2 weeks for basic training, he wants me to tell our boss that I looked at adult film on his computer. He wants me to get myself fired and risk legal action. Not to mention a big black mark on my employment record, just to get him to worm his way out of a firing on his record. The nerve. Also, this guy had 15 years with the company, and he was 6 months from retirement. He threw all that away by being stupid. Story 33. Not quite what you were looking for, but my boss fired a client of mine for being a bunch of lying. I'm an engineering consultant. I did some simulation work for a client, Company A, on a project they were doing for another company, Company B. They liked it, all was good. Maybe about 2 or 3 months later, I get a call from Company A saying that Company B had decided to change some things in the project and wanted to know if I could do some reworking on the simulation. Sure, no problem. I get the new purchase order worked out, get everything done as they asked me to do it, and I am under the impression they're happy with my work. Every time I turn something in, I get a thank you, and I'm told things look great. A few weeks in, my boss tells me they're now demanding to get a breakdown of how I'm spending my hours because they think I'm taking too long. I give him a spreadsheet detailing each of my tasks and how much time I spent on each, including when I worked on Thanksgiving, because they insisted something they gave me the day before absolutely needed to be done by Monday. After that, I got another visit from my boss, this time with him telling me that Company A was complaining that my work was subpar, not what they expected, and that I was supposed to be making recommendations on their design, all of which was a lie. I produced the work order, all of my emails between myself and them, and the files which I'd been working on. After they were presented with everything I handed over, they admitted that they were getting over budget on their project, and really just were trying to find a way to not have to pay for what I've done because Company B was breathing down their necks. My boss told them that we weren't doing crap for them anymore because of their lying, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief because I was really afraid I'd lose my job over all of that. Story 34. Ooh, I have a good one for this. At the limo company I used to work for, there was this one employee who was always breaking minor rules. She would wear jeans when we were supposed to wear slacks, show up 5 minutes late every day, etc. Not fireable offenses, but still annoying. She was also constantly complaining about how hard it was being in college. She was taking one online class, working and having a kid, and she'd shut up about her baby daddy drama. Basically, all of her problems were self-inflicted, but she careened about them constantly. So one day I'm at work and had already been there almost 8 hours when about 6 people called in for the night with various reasons. I ended up working about a 21-hour shift that day. But back to the story. This particular girl, we'll call her Jennifer, calls in sick saying her daughter has lice. She picked her up early from school, and she can't leave the house until both her and the kid get checked. This should have been our first red flag. It was Saturday, but this was a Saturday night in December and we were swamped, so this fact was overlooked. This girl knew all the limos and buses would be downtown that evening. So at about 9 that night, we were so busy that the owner of the company had to drive a group in one of our party buses. He's downtown on 5th Avenue, and who does he see walking across the street, right in front of the bus, in a short gold dress? So of course he's pissed. He drops off his group and goes back to the hotel he saw her go into. Long story short, it takes him a while, but he finds her. She sees him coming from pretty far away, he's a big guy, and she cowers down at her table trying to hide her head. He comes up to her and whispers in her ear, "Hey Jennifer, you're fired," grins at her, and walks away. That 20-hour shift was worth it after that story.